One of the many pleasures in coming to Colchester Castle Park is to enjoy the lovely flower gardens and floral displays, especially the one directly in front of this park bench. You'll notice that the display features a couple seated on a bench. They were known locally as Marmalade Emma and Teddy Grimes and were famous tramps in the town in the early 1900s.
I reckon a lot of people knew them more than they did the Mayor of Colchester. But that was always said. They called her Marmalade because they always said she helped herself to a jar of marmalade. So that name stuck up. They were quite nice if you didn't upset them. But of course, poor people like that were the butt of everybody. She was the dominating figure. If anybody upset him, or she defended him.
The Castle Listening Bench is just one of a number of projects undertaken by Colchester Recalled Oral History Group to take local stories to a much wider audience.
It so happened that exactly the same time as I started Colchester Recalled, the Essex Record Office started an oral history arm. It's now called Essex Sound and Video Archive. It is obviously enormous. From day one, we've given them copies of every single one of our interviews, and therefore we work closely with them. They got lottery funding and launched a project called Listening Benches, and they asked us to house the first bench in Essex.
It's been very, very popular. And we did a recent check, and it was something like 40,000 people have actually come and listened to these recordings, which is far better than any of the other sites anywhere else, I might add. At the moment, we've got two files on here. There's two buttons on this machine, so you can push the left-hand one. And what that contains are some memories dating back to before the First World War of a famous local pair of characters called Emma and Grimes. On the other side, if you push the other button, we have got memories of Colchester Castle and people playing in the park, pre-1950s anyway. But it starts off with one gentleman we interviewed who's still alive, well into his 90s, and he can remember the castle before it had its roof on, before you had the little footbridge which you've got now, and he gives so people can sit here and, my goodness, I didn't realise that. So when you went inside, there was no museum as such. You looked up and saw the stars. So he talks about that. And other people on here are talking about they used to play in the park. And one lady in particular, from the First World War period, this was their annual holiday. So when we go on holiday abroad now, their holiday, if they were lucky, was 2 or 3 days in the park. Mum would bring all the kids and they'd have a picnic, and that was it. They were happy.
Local historian Andrew Phillips started Colchester Recalled Oral History Group in the late 1980s, since when volunteers have recorded more than 3,500 hours of people's memories.
Well, I was doing a evening class at the Colchester Institute on Colchester history, and when we came to the 20th century, I said to the group, well, you live here, I'm an immigrant, I'm not going to tell you the history, I'm going to bring along some people who've lived through it. And I headhunted a number of people who I already knew fairly well to come along as a sort of forum. One of them was Harvey Benham, who owned and ran the local press. And afterwards he said to me, of course, that's not real oral history, we were all showing off. I subsequently wrote an article for a magazine jokingly about doing oral history, and I had a phone call which said, are you serious about this, and would you like some money? And of course it all led back to Harvey Benham, the newspaper man. And I ran another evening class on oral history, and that morphed into Colchester Recalled. With the money we employed a university bloke to do some interviewing, and that's how our archive begins. Because as the archive got bigger and bigger and bigger, we had to have it properly index. So from day one we had an archivist who was a retired librarian who set up a card index, and we gave every tape a number and so on. Now that is a vast digital spreadsheet because the archive is enormous. We have over 1,700 people recorded, and you can't even start to access that or listen to it all. To listen to the entire archive would take you about a year and a half doing nothing else except sleep. We have people who willingly listen to the interviews and either do a summary of the content or, better still, a full transcript of what's on it. Because if that's done digitally, it can be digitally searched, and that's our objective. So we start off with an interview which has a number, and then we have a summary of it which can be word searched on a computer, and finally a summary of that summary goes onto a spreadsheet so that you can log on, you can key in, oh I don't know, Colchester Royal Grammar School, and you can find all the people interviewed who went to Colchester Royal Grammar School.
I think it started about 1988. And I started within that year, but not right at the very beginning. At that time, I was very much involved in local history. I was training to become a tourist guide at that time. I got to know Andrew Phillips, who was the man who kind of really kick-started this off. And I suppose it was at Andrew's invitation, possibly, that I sort of went along to the meetings and got very, very involved. And I got very involved, and over the years, particularly during the 1990s was when we did a lot of our recordings with people who were late Victorians or born in the Edwardian years. I mean, we're so glad we did them. But over the years, I'm still very much involved. I'm the secretary of the group at the moment. I still do interviews, not quite as much as we did, but I've probably done somewhere between approaching 300 full interviews with Colchester residents. From 2-hour interviews to 10-hour interviews, all walks of life, and we're still doing them. The oldest person that I interviewed, and possibly the group has interviewed, was a lady who was born in 1884, and she was telling me things like she attended Queen Victoria's funeral with her father when she was like a 16-year-old girl. She remembered watching her brothers and friends having races with penny farthing bicycles up and down the road. I've interviewed people who've served in the First World War, and we've got their poignant memories of what was like life in the trenches. Another particular favourite of mine, I interviewed a tram driver. Now, between 1904 and 29, we had an electric tramway system in Colchester, and I believe the driver we have interviewed, I interviewed him, and he told me some of the perils of what it was like being a tram driver, how to slow the tram down when you're going down steep hills. I mean, things you never think about.
Projects help to unite a team of interviewers, and we've done a number down the years very successfully. For example, Colchester once had a very important factory-based industry, the rag trade. It was feeding the London market, but wages were cheaper here. It employed women, they sat with industrial sewing machines, and many of them were still alive, old ladies. And we interviewed lots of them, and that formed the basis of a number of academic studies. We had a marvellous office in the museum accommodation near the castle in Colchester, but that has been declared unsuitable, and we've moved it to the main library of the university.
And I know for a fact that lots of the undergraduate students working on their projects in the past and continue to make good use of our archive. And if they don't listen to the actual interviews, which they could do, they certainly refer to the summaries, the transcripts, if you like, that we provided. And we get lots of references in their works. You know, they'll reference the Culture Called Oral History Society, for example, where they've got their information. Even in such big works as the Victoria County History, you know, academics make use of what Culture Call has achieved.
Some of the earliest recordings were undertaken by the newspaper man Harvey Benham. He preferred to interview folk using a reel-to-reel tape recorder, although most of his colleagues generally favoured less bulky audio cassette machines. Today, digital recorders are widely used.
He interviewed a man who'd sailed in one of those great old smacks, fishing smacks that came out of Mersey, and he actually sailed to Iceland fishing, and he describes how they spent Christmas in Iceland in Jubilee year, and that was 1887.
The Jubilee year, we were blocked in the ice for 9 weeks in one harbour, Sealy Sewer. Mm-hmm. We were, there was no communication with us, with England, not then, because they hadn't got no cable aid until it was late after we came away from there. And the funny thing, the cable was run into Sealy Sewer where we were blocked in.
We've got an eyewitness story from the Colchester earthquake of 1884.
Mother told me about it. Her brother was going from one end of the village to the other, and there was a short path past the church through the graveyard, and when he got halfway through, he thought he wobbled, and he had a job to keep to his feet, and he wondered what was happening. And then he was terribly frightened because the gravestones, some of them stood out and some of them bent forward and some of them went right forward, and of course he thought it was the last day, and he scrambled along, and when he got a little further to the rectory that had chimney pots off, and then the penny dropped and he guessed it was an earthquake.
History is disappearing every hour as the generations pass. We've got lots of people describing the First World War, being literally in the trenches, literally involved in bayonet fights. It's terrifying stuff. And now, over the horizon go the generation who fought in the Second World War. And we actually did a project for Essex County Council at the 50th anniversary at the end of the Second World War. And we're very proud of it because we've got everything. We've got American bomber pilots, we've got German prisoners of war, we've got people from every known walk of life in Essex about life on the home front. And that could not be done now, but we've done it, and not just the edited highlights which are in that pack, but the full interviews are very, very telling. I interviewed a woman who was sitting at home, her father put the kettle on, she was 8, and before the kettle boiled, the bomb fell, she blacked out, she never saw her home again, both parents were killed, she had traumatic experience, rashes and goodness knows what afterwards. And we had to stop a couple of times because she was quite tearful. We're currently working with the Mercury Theatre, who have lottery funding to record their archive, and I'm supervising an oral history archive of the history of theatre in this area.
We've now moved over wholly to recording in digital format, so we have digital recorders, and all of our transcripts that we've been collecting up over the years, we are slowly scanning all those and preparing those as digitised files. So that's been a massive thing, and it's still ongoing. We haven't quite got there yet. We've also got a website which we're working on, and people can log into that, and that will tell them about the group and where we meet, etc. And what I got involved with as a little project from about a year ago, I've added a downloads page, a free downloads page, where people can go along and listen to some of our tracks, including the ones we got on the bench. They can listen to them in the comfort of their homes. And so we've got that. We also produce, and we've been doing it for the last 30 odd years, a magazine called Colchester Recalled, which contains little people stories and memories and what have you. And I've recently started putting some of those online free of charge, so you can download those as PDF files. So we are moving into the 21st century albeit a little slowly. We're getting there.
We also have a monthly meeting. Now this is probably unique. There may not be another oral history society which does recordings but also has a monthly meeting, and it gives us a sort of identity and locus in the community, and they're very popular, and we bring along speakers talking about local history events. We record their talk and that goes in the archive.
A major contributor to the oral history collection is retired consultant anaesthetist Dr. Fabrizio Casali. He became interested in recording people's stories while working at Colchester County Hospital.
And while I was working there, I met a Dr. Penfold who collected a lot of material, historical material about the hospital. And I've taken over that equipment and all the papers that it collected. Well, I as soon as I've done the recording, I hand them over to Andrew Phillips, and what I try to do is to make a little note of what was said, so that there is a little record available for anybody who's going to transcribe the
The enormous archive we've got on doctors and paramedicals and nurses, consultants, that's being used by a project as the Essex County Hospital in Colchester finally closes.
Well, I think it's invaluable. I think it's something which nowadays one has the facilities of recording them and also maybe storing them better than in the past.
We're always looking for volunteers. The message is come and join us. We try to make sure everybody enjoys what they're doing and owns what they're doing.
So he was also the officer in charge of the Home Guard in Loudoun-on-Hay.
The best way is when someone wants to do it, you actually get them to sit in on an interview. Sometimes you interview them because they've often got a story to tell, and then they are having sat in on an interview they're off on their own. The best interviewers tend to be older people. There's fairly obvious reasons for that. They've got the time and they've got the sort of experience and they know what they're talking about.
Well, I would say to people, how many people have often said to themselves, oh, if only I'd have recorded mum's memories or granny's memories. And of course what happens, we don't do it. And time goes on and we never get around to doing it, and Nanny and mum and dad die and we've lost their memories forever. By doing this, we are recording these individuals for their families for one thing, for the greater benefit of people around everywhere. We've got people listening to these across the other side of the world on our website. And also, one of the things that people that I've come across quite a few times is after someone's parents has died that we've interviewed, they've said to me, oh, I'm so happy because we've got father's memories, we can sit and listen to them, we can hear him again, that's like he's sitting in the room. And it's the kind of evidence, oral history is something you won't find written in normal books, in normal history. You know, in the past it's all about kings and queens, important people, communities, people who've done well, even autobiographies about people who've achieved something. The normal people who worked in the shops, you know, who swept the factory floors, every person has got a voice in history, and we've tried to address that. I think we've done a fantastic job.
It will mean that an academic, a student, a member of the general public can search and find the details of every interview that we've got. It's on an Excel spreadsheet, and we've been dropping in the information that will make that archive. And this is the future of Colchester Record.